Good afternoon, Washington, D.C. This is Tony Browder here with another edition of the Browder File Show here on WPFW. And as always, I'm excited to be here. I always have very special guests and a lot of interesting information to share with you. This program is no different. I want to start off, though, talking about loss and, and memory. When a loved one passes, we often lament their passing. I just lost a very close family member a few weeks ago. And as I was thinking about her loss, thinking about the fact that I'll never have an opportunity to see her again or to talk to her again, as those feelings, as the weight of the loss was weighing on me, fortunately, my thoughts shifted and I began thinking about all the fond memories I had of her. And those fond memories lifted me out of my funk. And what dawned on me is what I know all too well, and that is that all we are memories. We have hundreds of millions of memories stored within our brains. And it's our ability to access those memories that helps us think fondly of people, events, and circumstances in our lives. So we have a great deal of control over our memories of the past, how we feel about the present, and our thoughts concerning the future. So memory is really everything. And working here at WPFW, listening to this station for over 48 years, I often notice how when an entertainer passes, we lament their loss and the loss of their artistic contributions. If it's a musician who was particularly talented, then there'll be special programming showcasing their greatest hits or how their music has evolved over the years. In the past month, we've lost Frankie Beverly in September of last year. We lost Quincy Jones in November of last year. This past March, we lost Roy Ayers. And last month, we lost Sly Stone. And in each instance, this station honored the memory of those entertainers by showcasing their historical record, giving us memories of their music so that we could think about where we were when we heard this song, what we were doing. So memories are what gets us through difficult times. But, there's one important thing that is significant to me, and that is, why should we wait until someone passes to think of them fondly? It's what we often do, it's what we're programmed to do, but very rarely do we have an opportunity or do we take the time to remember someone who's still with us. Yesterday, July 22nd, was the 84th birthday of George Clinton. And George is still with us. And so I want to spend today's show celebrating the life and the legacy of George Clinton. He's still performing, he's still making music. Um, so, George was born July the 22nd, 1941 in Kannapolis, North Carolina. We know him as a singer and a songwriter, a producer, a band leader. He's a pioneer of funk music, took funk to a whole new level. He's been called Dr. Funkenstein, the Prime Minister of Funk, and he's probably best known for leading the bands Parliament and Funkadelic in the 1970s. They've given us such hits as One Nation Under a Groove, Knee Deep, Aqua Boogie, Flashlight, and especially Chocolate City for those of us who have made our home in DC for several decades. He's given us classic albums such as Standing on the Verge of Getting It On, Cosmic Slop, Atomic Dog, and Mothership Connection. He's worked with musicians such as Bootsy Collins, Gary Snyder, Bernie Worrell. He's had singers, some dynamic singers such as Felipe Wynne, Jessica Cleaves, and the Brides of Funkenstein. So I can't think of a better way to honor the legacy, the musical genius of George Clinton than to have as my special guest, my dear friend, Brother Diem Jones, to talk about his life and his work with with George Clinton, his work here in DC with WPFW. Diem has known George since the 70s, and he was actually the art director of George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, and did numerous album covers for George, the group, and certain members of the group. So, Diem Jones, how are you? How you doing, brother?
I am just fabulous. The first thing that started the day was I woke up.
Absolutely.
And after waking up, I realized this was our time to come together. So I thank you so much for inviting me to participate in your show, inviting me back to WPFW. I was in 1989 was the development director of WPFW when we were down at 7th and H.
There you go.
So WPFW has always been very close to my heart. I currently don't live in the area. Um, but DC, DC is it's like a chocolate city. It's not a dream. It is my home. And
And
thank you for rolling out the welcome mat. And yeah, this is going to be a fabulous day.
well, I mean, you've got a lot of memories here in DC. You graduated from American University, is that correct?
I did. I did.
Yeah.
Actually, my parents are from DC, although I grew up with my father mostly. Who was in the military. So, spent um, first and second grade in DC, third through fifth was in Germany. And, the rest starts going down this trail of grooving and moving to North Dakota, to Washington State, to Seattle. Um, and coming back to DC to go to American U, it was what drew me, of course, was their communications program. I was a film major. And then I taught at AU. I taught photography there for 2 years. And so it's a special place. It's a special place. My time actually with P-Funk started, I was still at American U. I was in my last year. It was actually December 4th of 1974. And I was called to do a photo session for, I was doing some work for Zamoski's, which is the record distributor independent record distributor that distributed Casablanca Records, among other labels. And, November 15th, they asked me to come shoot this new singer at a nightclub, and her name was Donna Summer. This was before Love to Love You Baby. So I did that. December 4th, they said there's this group called The Parliament, and they need a group shot, but the leader won't be there tomorrow. So they can't come to your studio. Can you come and take this group shot? And there's this many people in the group. I said, sure. So I don't know if you know what a view camera is, but I took my studio with me. So my camera was, one of the old time cameras that you had to put the hood over your head.
Oh,
My
large format, right?
Yes, it was an 8x10 view camera.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And, my strobe lights, and the manager looked at me and he said, boy, he didn't say, boy, let me clean that up because that would have started a whole nother conversation. But he just said, I was a photographer, and if you can bring that here backstage, number one, you're out of your mind. And number two, everyone will come to your studio tomorrow except for George. But do the shot today, and obviously we're supposed to do some things together. So I set up my camera, did that shot, and that was the beginning of a relationship that continues to this day. The next day, of course, the group did come to my studio, and this is how we came together. I mean, I was a product from a military family, so I was a little on the conservative.
Regimented conservative side, yeah.
Yes,
Hey, Diem,
yes.
one quick question. Can you boost your audio a little bit? You're a little low on my end, and I want to make sure that everyone can hear everything that you
Hmm.
have to share.
Boosting my audio. Let's see if I can do that. Never had to do that before, but of course it's you. So, what else would it be?
All right. I want to get it. I want to get it right, man. I want to make sure that everybody can hear these incredible stories you're laying down for us.
Okay, so is that any better?
Yes, continue,
Okay, and let
please.
me move a little closer because, the closer we get, the more we touch.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing like being interconnected. Um, yeah, yeah. So um, back to my conservatism, I was still wearing ties every day, and I
Well, I
was.
mean, that's your dad, you know. I had the occasion of meeting your dad and getting to know him. Wonderful brother, wonderful human being. And I have to commend him on how he raised you. You know,
Hmm,
he instilled that military regimen, that military discipline, but he also passed on to you a sense of integrity and purpose. And that's been your calling card for all the years that I've
hmm.
known you. So thank goodness for fathers.
Thank you, brother. I think of both he and my mother and the other
Hmm.
ancestors daily. And reflecting on what you said at the beginning of the show, I believe we are connected with our ancestors. I believe
Absolutely.
that everybody that's been in our life, we pretty much have their voice with us.
Hmm.
We can go reference that. Like, what would my grandmother say? And, darn if we can't hear the grandmother's voice.
Hmm.
I've just always said, I did my first eulogy when I was 16, and I've always said that we are kind of, I'll use the word, kind of ignorant that we don't appreciate each other until we're gone. Like, the purpose of this show. Why do we wait till we're gone to say, oh, wow, this person influenced me? P Funk had so much to do with who I became. Why do we
Hmm.
have to wait till it's gone to
Right.
have
A lot
that
of
kind
that
of?
is socialization. You know, we've been socialized to only think about the present moment and to disregard the past. But I've been seeing a resurgence in the Sankofa process, reclaiming the best examples of our past, those ancestors who have established a foundation for us. So to have a marriage of the past and the present is important if we're going to make a meaningful future out of our lives. So
Yes.
yes, it's critical.
And at the same time, we have to allow each other to grieve. So I do, share my deepest condolences with you and your recent family loss. And, we'll say this with all sincerity. That family member is now more with you than ever before.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate you celebrating the time that you had together. And whew, look at you now.
Yeah,
Is it
yeah,
one of you or are you one plus two plus three plus four? That's who we are.
yeah, yeah,
You've
yeah.
always been someone who has had an appreciation of our ancestors
Hmm.
and an awareness of our times.
Hmm. And
And
I
for
mentioned
that,
Frankie. I mentioned Frankie Beverly, and one of his songs that comes to the forefront of my mind is one of his classics, "We Are One." You know, we are one. We're not really individuals. We're all part of the same family. We're all part of the same consciousness. We just view things a little differently, but that makes life, it makes this journey so much better because we have different perspectives of the same thing. So continue talking about George and how did you begin to form this bond with George, which has spanned the decades now, over 4 decades.
thank you for bringing it back home. We'll talk about the one later on. But so did the group shot backstage. They came to my studio. Of course, I had my rules. Shoes off at the door. If you want to smoke something, you go outside. Nobody had ever spoken to the group this way before. And to me, it's like, you're in my home. My home was my studio. I was at 1735 New Hampshire Avenue. And that turned into a level of respect with the group. It continued with George. He asked me to, as we spoke after the session, and we got to know each other. And he said, you're really a writer, but right now I need you to be my photographer. And right now you're writing about 90% BS and 10% is the P. And if you keep writing, you can flip the equation. But right now, I need you behind the camera. And thus we began our relationship. I was honored to be one of four visual artists that were in the cohort. There was
Hmm.
Pedro Bell, There was Ronald Edwards, who was from DC, Overton Lloyd. They're all illustrators, and then myself.
Right. Pedro Bell, let's see. Pedro Bell did
Your homie.
Cosmic Slop album cover.
Yeah. You know he's
I
from
recognize
Chicago,
his
right?
work. Huh?
Hardcore. He's from Chicago.
Okay, okay,
All
okay.
right. But Hardcore Jollies, all of the cartoony covers that you
Mm,
could, that the Funkadelic album covers that you would spend 2 hours looking at the cover because it
exactly.
told the
With all
story.
the detail, right?
And
And
which really,
Overton Lord, he did Motor Booty Affair, right?
yes, he did.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, he
His art
did.
is distinctive as well.
And what happened was that the artists became interpreters.
Mm-hmm.
We were all assigned a project, and the information was given to us. George's concept, what he saw, and often there was an interaction, and then go do your thing.
Okay.
And boy, what a role to play to be an interpreter and to be free to interpret and use the tools that you've been gifted to how can I visually represent what I'm hearing in my ears when I listen to this song. And we all did that in our different ways, our different styles. I became the photographer, art director, and then the creative director because I also was involved in the production of music videos. So yeah, being part of this cohort though, Pedro Bell, Ronald Edwards, Overton Lloyd, and myself. Um, so, and I say being an interpreter. So let me back up because George is such who is George Clinton? We hear the name, we hear that he's been around with the parliament since the 50s, but, it's like, who is that man who had so much to do with our culture,
Mm-hmm.
with the vision of the future? George started singing in a barbershop. He was a doo-wopper.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, this was in the 50s, and he went to see Frankie Lyman, who had a hit out at the time, Why the Fools Fall in Love.
X. Mm-hmm.
And guess
Frankie
what
Lyman
happened?
and the teenagers, right?
Right,
Yes,
right.
sir.
And George saw all the women running up to Frankie. He said, I want that. So that inspired him to go ahead and become a songwriter.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the barbershop, cutting hair, dyeing and frying and laying it to the side in Plainfield, New Jersey. The group would come over, they would sing in the back, they did some other activities in the back, but that's where the parliaments began, was in this barbershop. And, you know, uh, George, even though he has become quite the leader, I mean, there's so many concepts that he laid down early that are so relevant today that, you ask yourself, well, you know, how did he create those things? Well, George is a vessel. He receives things. I mean, I think he's three things. He's a vessel, he's a magnet, and he's a master producer.
Mm-hmm. And let me add a fourth. He's also an innovator.
Yes,
George has
yes.
done things that nobody else in the music industry has done. He's done things creatively that no one would even dare think of doing, and he gets away with it because he does these things so well, right?
Well, George, I mean, others, we had a lot of intersections. One of the things is, um, believing in yourself.
Mm,
Who says you can't do this?
right.
I know myself, how I was raised in my military household. If I used the word can't, I got slapped.
Mm,
I don't think George's house was that way, but I think the difference between a child and an adult is one word, two letters, N-O. When you start saying no to yourself, start suppressing yourself, you're growing up. That's why artists always seem to be youth-like because they're expressive. They're not holding back. Well,
hmm
he did not hold back.
Yeah.
He was fully into the explorations of life and the notations of life. He was a consummate reader. He is a consummate reader. Let's once again ring the bell. We are celebrating the life of George, Dr. Funkenstein Clinton, who was born the 22nd of July, 1941.
Hmm.
Um,
And
uh,
there's an old saying, and you mentioned that he's a reader. And let me just remind my guests, you're listening to the Browder File Show. My guest today is Diem Jones, and we're talking about the life and the legacy of George Clinton. You mentioned, Diem, that George is a reader, and one saying that I've gotten from my daughter, she's worked with dozens of students in her classrooms, is the fact that readers become leaders. The
mm,
more you know, the greater your capacity to grow. So you can always tell someone who's in the vanguard of anything, they're doing that because of all of the memories they have stored in their minds from what they've read, the experiences that they had, and their abilities to say yes to themselves. And they lead the pack for those who didn't say yes or those who haven't read. So yeah, that's a great description of George, man. Continue, brother.
yeah, and I think that in terms of reading, being a truth sayer, truth sayers have been here since the beginning of time.
Hmm.
The stories haven't changed, the packaging around them. It's like rhythm. You know, when you want to communicate, find a rhythm of the people you're trying to communicate with,
Hmm.
and then everything can flow. So George was a master at that,
Yeah.
um, and would take stories that he'd read, and you know, um, he told me once. He said, "Look, you want to tell stories in a song. However, you can't do that unless you make them dance. So if you make them dance, then you can put in your stories. They may not hear them right away, but you've got their attention. It's the rhythm that holds them. It's the one. P-Funk, we'll talk about what P-Funk means because a lot of people are confused. Um, so, P-Funk, thought to be Parliament Funkadelic. So it got shortened to P-Funk. Well, what is funk? Well, funk is fun, Fun, with a K on it, and the K is for kindness. I said this once at a talk, and there was a fan who came up afterwards. There's no kindness in funk. I said, that became a 30-minute conversation, and I was just like, wow. I love hearing different perspectives, but the biggest thing I think about communications is learning to hear, learning
Hmm.
to listen.
Learning to listen. Absolutely. It's an art form,
Um,
brother.
Yeah, but George, in all of his visionary work, he never wanted to be a guru. He's a receiver. He calls himself intentional but not conscious. So there was this constant state of stream of consciousness. In fact, George George in his magnetism would always have people around him, and often things would come up in that conversation. You shake up the jar, and you got a new mix. So the big expression was write that down. Because then, when you're really in a free form conversation, you will find that you're saying things you've never heard before
Mhm. Absolutely.
because you don't know what you know until a button gets pushed. And that's the value of interconnectivity between human beings. And you've got to be able to let that flow. And through that flow, brother, I mean, messages came out that, 1974, Chocolate City, they call it the White House, but that's a temporary fact. Can you dig it, CC? Wait a minute, 1974, the White House was not chocolate, and it did not have vanilla suburbs, or it did have vanilla suburbs, which flipped around. So George made this comment, the Chocolate City is my dream.
Hmm.
And of course, DC was the original chocolate city. A couple of other cities borrowed the name Chocolate City just because of their cultural context. But let it be known, here we are in DC. DC is Chocolate City and will always
So
be, no matter what the
so
gentry do.
DM, let's put a pin in that for a minute because I was living in DC. As a matter of fact, I just graduated from Howard in '74 when that album came out. And of course, you know, The cover of the album was a visual delight. It was a drawing of Lincoln sitting in the chair in the Lincoln Memorial, but it was a chocolate version of Lincoln. And I recall, just to show you how transcendent George's music was. The message was powerful. The beat was funky, got you moving, but the message was powerful and it laid in your subconscious, right? And sprouted at different points in time. Chocolate City was a hit in DC. And several years later, I remember hearing Dr. Welsing, Dr. Frances Welsing, in one of her talks say that a neighbor of hers, matter of fact, I'll say the name, Barbara Sizemore, who was for a brief period of time the superintendent of DC public school system. My homegirl, Barbara Sizemore, a powerful, brilliant educator. And because of her last name, Sizemore didn't readily identify her as an African American. She had received a letter from some folk in her community. Now they lived in upper 16th Street, right, the Gold Coast, and there were some people in that community, non-African American people, non-Christian people in that community, who were incensed over the popularity of that song and the deeper meanings of Chocolate City. God bless Chocolate City and its vanilla suburbs, right? And so they convened a meeting to discuss how to stop DC from becoming Chocolate City. So Dr. Sizemore brought the letter to Dr. Welsing, and Dr. Welsing shared it with the community in one of her gatherings. And we just pondered, what this would mean for the DC community, for Chocolate City in the near future. And this letter became known in the larger community as the plan, right? The plan. And when some popular radio hosts and news commentators referenced the plan, they always did it in air quotes, as if this was just a figment of Black people's imagination. But fast forward to 2025, it is no longer Chocolate City. It's now Latte Land, right? With chocolate sprinkles in Ward 9, that's Prince George's County. And so it's really important to understand how people, talented people like George, can have this vision, and that vision can be shared with hundreds of thousands, millions of people, and move them in a certain way. And that movement causes a reaction on the other side of town. And that reaction is designed to cease and desist movements toward liberating a people and allowing them to be free. So, I just wanted to throw that in there because we sometimes take this music and these musicians for granted, but they have a way of shaping the consciousness of young people, particularly, and moving them into a specific direction, political direction, economic directions, and social directions. And that those activities are sometimes are not looked upon favorably by the powers that be.
Well, we're overlooked. George was a master of the subliminal.
Mm-hmm.
Subliminal seduction was something that we thought the film industry did, but George was so wise. He would, as I say, he never wanted to be a guru or a leader, but he became one. And sometimes he used himself. For example, one of the lines from the song, "The bigger the headache, the bigger the pill. They call me the big pill." Well, in actuality, he wasn't trying to be the big pill. He was trying to tell you that you could be the big pill. That self-empowerment, believe in yourself. I mean, that's what I was saying about the truth sayers throughout time have been just repeating the same primary messages. They're
Mm-hmm.
just, well, okay, that one didn't work, obviously, because they're still going over and doing that stuff that I don't want to call it stupid, but I think they could do better. So let me
Mm-hmm.
say it again this way, and maybe they'll hear it and wake up.
Mm-hmm.
So he
And
definitely
the,
woke
the
us up.
underlying message is free your mind and your behind will follow, right? Think it
Well,
ain't illegal yet, right?
and thinking and look at us now. Okay, so the line that you just said quickly, think it ain't illegal yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, read the books while you can before they burn them,
There you
before they
go.
ban them.
Mm-hmm.
Think it ain't illegal yet.
Yeah.
I mean, to lay down such, we'd have to say forward thinking wisdom because we were too busy shaking our booty, right? There was many of us. Because I was sitting in the background saying, okay, let me interpret this. Well, what is he really saying? Because there are times, George being a vessel, things would come through him. For
Mm-hmm.
example, we had a record out called You Shouldn't Have Bit Fish. So, with a hook attached to his mind and a line to his behind, man was nuclear fishing. You shouldn't have bit fish. So there we were, July 4th, 1979, at Hampton, the Hampton Amphitheater. And we're going to the backstage, and there were 50 people there waving Bibles. And so George grabbed me and he said, well, I'm also known as Dr. Wu, but that's another story. Wu, what's going on? I said, I don't know, G, but we got to get back there and do the show. 3 weeks later, we're in Philly, and the Fruit of Islam were blocking the doorway at backstage. And he said, Wu, I'm not taking another step till you tell me what's going on. I said, I think I got it, G. Repeat after me because they're your own words. With a hook attached to his mind and a line to his behind, man was nuclear fishing. You shouldn't have bit fish. Yeah. I said, well, so what you're saying is if you don't want fishy breath, don't eat the fish. Yeah. I said, so another way to interpret that is if you don't want to get holy, don't read the good book. I said that. Yeah, you did. So, that's the thing about the creation of art. We have an intended outcome, an intended message, but we let it go
Mm.
and see what people do with it. But what people did with it was fall in line and thought he was in the pulpit, and that wasn't his
Well,
intention.
let me take this moment again to remind our listeners that you are listening to WPFW. This is Tony Browder, host of the Browder File Show, and my guest today is Diem Jones, who has a history with WPFW. Man, you want to share our listeners about your history with the station? You mentioned previously that you were with the station back in 1979, was it?
89,
80,
1989. I
1989.
came I came to DC, back to DC from LA in 1987, 88, and was doing some consulting work with Lockheed and NASA. And a friend of mine, Leon Collins, was the general manager of WPFW. And my work at the time was photography and art direction and graphics. So, Leon needed to have a newsletter designed. I said, okay, I'll do that for you, Leon. I'll help you. Then he said, do you know anything about the program called Excel, which is a spreadsheet program? I said, yes. So he let me know he needed help doing a budget. So I did the budget for him. And then he said, can you help me? This is how we raise money to stay on the air. It's called a pledge drive. And we're asking the people to support us because we don't have advertising. And I said, wow, I'd love to help. So I got hired to manage a pledge drive, and we did pretty well. And I thought about it. I said, oh, a little graphics over here, some technical work here, and this fundraising thing over there. Maybe I should just forget NASA and Lockheed and see if I can work out something to be full time, put all my energies into this station. So I asked Leon about, becoming a staff member. At that time, the station had a staff of 5 and 124 volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, no, you don't want to come in here. he said, he said, the volunteers don't really listen to us. I said, Leon, I want to help you. I love the mission of the station, and I'd like to be part of making that mission come to light. He shook his head and sighed. He says, okay. We've never had one, but I'm going to create a position called development director and look through these responsibilities and see what you can do. And, at that time, our fulfillment rate on our pledges was around 45%. which is, as the listeners to this show know, when we go on the air and ask for your support, some, you know, percentage of the listeners do commit to sending support. Now,
It's about 8%, Diem. Yeah.
okay, about 8%, but now
Hmm.
what percentage of those who make a pledge pay their pledge? And that's what's called a fulfillment rate. So while I was there in that position, even though we did 4 pledge drives a year, and we raised the fulfillment rate from 45% to 90%, which
Mm.
was seen as a major achievement. The next task was to write grants. Well, my father taught me how to write grants because at 9 years old, he said, "Son, you can have anything you want. Give me a 3-page written justification." So I learned how to write a grant. And in fact, he told me I was so good at it, he couldn't deny me anything, but I had to be less than a man to ask for something. So I took my anger and put that into work.
Wait a minute, that's a heck of a psychological move.
Ooh, I'm telling you now.
So your old man was sharp. It was a sharp dude, man.
So sharp that when I told him that story later, he said, "I did that, son." Revisionist history is, I think, the tool of many parents. Um, but he laughed since, and he just kind of chuckled, and we taught each other things, and that was the beauty of our relationship. But as George and I taught each other things, I came in with my ties. We would go to the recording studio, and I'm wanting, "George, what's the deliverable? What's the deadline?" He said, um, "Spontaneity breeds creativity. Let's funk it. Turn on the mic." Drove me crazy because I'm ready to compartmentalize and he's ready to open it up, because what George has done to this day is bring together some of the most brilliant minds on the planet. And when you contributed to a song, it was called P. So he would say, "Hey, man, you want to pee on this? And if I pee on you, will you pee on me?" Which sounds like something else, but it's really, will you contribute what comes through your spirit when you hear everything that's already here? That's you.
Hmm.
That's, you know, and for that comes some of the most groundbreaking solos in the music industry to this day come off of some of these sessions.
So
But,
give me some examples. You mentioned some of George's collaborators. Name me three of your top favorite collaborators.
well, Bernie Worrell, of course, I actually did Bernie's first solo album cover, All the
All right.
Woo in the World.
So for those who are under 40 who don't know what Bernie Worrell, we gotta speak to everybody in our audience. So who is Bernie Worrell?
Bernie Worrell was a concert pianist at age 5. He went. He was. He was brilliant. He was classically trained, and he was the keyboard player in Parliament Funkadelic. That in the world of music instruments, it's when instruments all became electronic. There's a language that the instruments speak. It's called MIDI, Musical Interface Digital Instrument. So that way you could play one keyboard and actually have the sound of two. Well, before MIDI, there was Bernie, and
Mm.
Bernie would have 3 stacks of 9 keyboards surrounding him and play them all. But this was not an electronic trigger. This was Bernie.
Okay.
And, when I first went into the studio with George, Bernie was there. He said, "Bernie, play me Green." And I'm like, what is this? George grabbed me. He says, "Just close your eyes." And whatever Bernie played, all I saw was green. At that point, I knew I was in the land of magic. I said,
Hmm.
"Okay." But Bernie was that savant, that interpreter who made you feel things. Because that's the thing about music. What do you hear and what do you feel?
Hmm.
And when you can get something that people can feel, they will be with you for a lifetime.
Now, look, let's put a pin in that for a minute. This is Tony Browder. I'm talking to Diem Jones, and we're talking about George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, and that whole crew. What you just mentioned about George asking Bernie to play the color green reminds me of an article I read, Michael Jackson, when he wrote "We Are the World," and he said in that article that he and Lionel were working on the lyrics to that song, and he took Janet into a closet, closed the door, and he hummed this melody. And he told Janet, "Close your eyes. They're in the closet now anyway. Close your eyes and tell me what you see." And she said, I see starving people, right? And so this idea of certain musical notes and melodies conjuring up images, influencing consciousness are real. It's something that Brother Ah, who was a stalwart here at WPFW, taught me years ago and helped me to truly understand the extent to which sound vibration, right? Sound frequency can transform and influence consciousness, right? So Bernie was one musician that accompanied George that you admired. Give me two others.
Um, Bootsy Collins.
Bootsy, yes sir.
They call me Bootsy, baby.
Yeah.
I'm not the Holy Ghost. Just call me Casper. Bootsy was a bass player who, at 16, was playing with James Brown, along with his brother and a couple of other musicians who became their own band. And Bootsy was an innovator um, and learned discipline from James Brown.
Hmm.
There was a time when the band, James Brown, was starting to break up, and George had heard of Bootsy and basically wooed Bootsy to join Parliament. He said, "Look, you'll have your own, you'll be a solo artist, but right now I need you to be part of Funkadelic. And we're going to work to branch you out." So Bootsy came in and did just that and excited the world, became his, Bootsy's rubber band.
Hmm.
The horn section also came from James Brown.
Yeah, Fred Wesley, right? And the
Fred
horny
was
horns.
So Fred Wesley, the trombone player with James Brown, was the third person. I mean, there's so many people in the group that I love and have learned a lot from, but Fred and I did a lot of work together outside of P-Funk and came to admire Fred, whose birthday happens to be July 4th.
Mm.
Uh, but um, from the James Brown transition, there were two members of that group, Bootsy and Fred, that I really um, admire, was influenced by, and did a couple of album covers for Bootsy, some posters, some tour books. Um, yeah, Fred and I worked together on some projects in Gabon, West Africa. We
Mm.
did about 9 albums together.
Mm.
So there are the relationships. P-Funk is a family,
Absolutely.
and there are people that are still with the group who were there in 1974.
Hmm.
Remember, George is 84 now.
Yep.
And, bless him, he's still on the road with a band of 30. And of course, that band now includes some grandkids. Uh,
Gotta love it, man. Got to
and,
love it.
at 84, if I'm so blessed to become 84, if I have half the energy of George, I'll be all right. I'll be
Hmm.
all right. But he's still leading, he's still creating, and still innovating.
Okay. Well,
Um,
give me a third musician. You gave me Bernie Worrell, Bootsy Collins, and give me a third
Well, I
musician.
said Fred Wesley, but
Yeah,
I
but
will also say Gary Scheider. Gary,
okay.
we became very close. Gary was the music director of the group, singer, guitar player. He was the original diaper man. His son now, Garrett, is started off as wearing his father's diaper. But speaking of diapers, okay, let me back up.
That's a heck of a legacy. I wear my father's diapers, right? He don't walk in his shoes. I wear his diapers.
And when I don't wear them, they're so stiff they stand up in the corner, right? But when I first first saw Parliament, when I first saw Funkadelic at Maverick's Flat in LA, there was, they reeled out caskets to the stage. And everybody got out of a casket and we went to their respective places. George got out of a casket wearing a sheet. And so as he was singing in his sheet, I mean, George, like James Brown, he's getting, he's dripping wet, he's sweating. And I saw a stream come from underneath the sheet. There were people who were so moved by the music, they were sitting in the front row with their mouths open to catch some of that stream. And I'll leave it like that. That's the kind of infectious footprint that George and Parliament Funkadelic had. Because some people were, yes, most people get moved by the rhythm, and some people heard the messages right away.
Mm-hmm.
Like good thoughts, bad thoughts.
Oh, that's my favorite, man. Good thoughts, bad thoughts. And if you don't mind, I just want to take a minute to reflect on that particular song. It's side B of the album Standing on the Verge of Getting It On, the last cut on side B. And that was what, 1974, 1975. I would go to sleep listening to that album. And then it dawned on me, because it has a very hypnotic guitar riff and the vocals. George does the vocals, and they're in a very low pitched and slow tone. And at some point one evening, I heard a couple of the lyrics and they just stuck with me. And so I stayed up most of the night and I wrote down the entire lyrics to the song. And what I
Nice.
realized was that that song, Good Thoughts, Bad Thoughts, was really a formula for life, a formula for living. All life is about thoughts, right? And they're either good thoughts or bad thoughts. And all these thoughts come from someplace and they shape your life. And I literally wound up making the lyrics to Good Thoughts, Bad Thoughts my mantra as I was searching to find myself in the late 70s. And then ultimately I found a book called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And as
Mm.
I'm reading through this little book, it's less than 100 pages. As I'm reading through this book, I find passages from Good Thoughts, Bad Thoughts. And I realize As a Man Thinketh was written at the turn of last century, around 1914, something like that. And I realized George Clinton has read this book. So you
Mhm.
shared with me an interesting story about how that song came to be. You want to share it with our listeners?
Well, good thoughts, bad thoughts, of course, as you say, had such meaning to it. Um, One of the lines that came out of the song was, "Free your mind and your ass will follow."
Hmm.
I hope that's appropriate to say over the air, but an ass is an animal. But free your mind, you know, just to say free your mind to someone, wow, what does that mean? What does it mean to free your mind? Oh, and my body will follow. So my body is constricted by my mind. So you could just listen to that one line and dissect it and project it and realize that while it sounded good, it had a little innuendo, free your mind and your ass will follow.
Hmm.
Um, but that's freeing your mind was so integral to the core of that song. And that was Eddie Hazel on the guitar, by the way, that
Okay.
mesmerized us all because he was as gifted as he was. Yeah.
But
So
but
that's
speaking of lines from that song, the line that stays with me is that you rise as high as your dominant aspiration, you descend to the level of your lowest concept of yourself. The infinite intelligence within you knows the answer. Its nature is to respond to your thoughts.
amen.
Right? That I mean, that's life, man. That's life. I love it. But you share with our listeners the story about who inspired George to write that song.
Well, who inspired George? So many things. One of the things about reading, um, George would read books, and he also had his wife at the time was reading him books. So he
Hmm.
was always getting this input. So the inspiration would come. I mean, George would fall asleep having a book read to him. And
Mm.
of course, that would, you know, be imprinted. And he would wake up in the middle of the night and you know, George was consummate reader and a consummate writer, and would wake up writing because something crystallized in the middle of the night, however long nights were, which weren't that long at that time. Um, that song was, I call it a spark plug, because it inspired me, but because the guitar was so innovative,
Hmm.
you didn't have to hear the words. In fact, the words don't start until at least a third way into the song. So
Exactly.
you're mesmerized by the music, and all of a sudden you hear this voice, which is George, but he slowed it down, which lowered it. And also the tempo
Right.
made if you wanted to hear, it was prepared for you to hear as with the least amount of effort.
And actually, by slowing it down and lowering the tempo, it pulls you in,
Right.
right? You lean forward to what is he saying? And he just seduces you to open up your mind and just drink from this fount of wisdom that he's pouring into your consciousness. I mean, that's how I
Yeah.
interpreted that song, man.
No, and you're absolutely right. One of the things you said earlier about the song or the lyrics would well, let me not ponder on how you said it. What I say is they open you up. There are things
Mm.
inside of you that need to be released.
Yeah,
So Release Yourself was a song. I think Larry Graham did that. Um,
true.
if we grew up at a time where song titles and song themes and song lyrics meant something,
Mm-hmm.
you heard them, you sang them, you would, riff on them yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't occur as much today as it did
Yeah.
then, and I'm hopeful that the generations that are up and comings will find ways to open their ear holes.
Yeah. Well, look, let me add to that. Album covers and liner notes were
Yeah,
also a key part of music back in the 60s and in the 70s and the 80s. You started this conversation talking about the artists who did the covers for Parliament and Funkadelic, and they had a different style, and each style, just pulled you into the album and reflected some of the music on the album itself. And then the liner notes, you're reading the lyrics, and you're like, oh Lord, did he really say this? Am I really hearing this? It was so many entry points into your consciousness, so many ways of planting memories that could be accessed a day later, a month later, a year later, a lifetime later. So there's so many different ways of infusing, our minds and our consciousnesses with spirit and energy. Well, look, man, before we go, because we've got I've got about 4 more minutes with you before I close out the show. Do two things for me. Um, Tell our listeners the differences between the groups Parliament and the group Funkadelic. And you started off also referencing the one. What is the one, and why is the one important as opposed to the two or the four or whatever?
well, I'll address that first. And so when we talk about the one, we're talking about the music structure. In the measure, it was funk is a 4/4 beat. All right, so there are four beats. And what is the beginning of that phrase? It's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. James Brown really emphasized that in his work.
Mhm.
And while everything is on the one became a lyric, one is also an acronym for Omnipresent Negroes Escaped. But that's just like what we used to do during slave time by braiding our hair, and inside the braid was a pattern, the map for you to go. Um, Omnipresent Negroes escaped. Everything is on the one.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I say, um, sometimes, as I said earlier, George was intentional but not conscious with it. It would just come out.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It was a
uh,
conduit. He was vessel.
A kind of that. Like, for example, he came to my studio and he said, before he got there, he said, okay, I want to do something like Huey Newton. I want to get the wicker chair and I'll just be Huey Newton. I said, stop, George. If you call yourself Huey Newton and go to the Bay Area, you might get hurt. So in that following conversation, we came up with the character, the title, Uncle Jam. And I did that cover and became Uncle Jam Wants You, one of the favorite ones with George holding the bop gun and the flashlight. And, that became a historical piece.
Yeah.
So that is on the one. Your other question was about
The difference between Parliament
Parliament
and
and
Funkadelic.
Funkadelic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The Parliaments were the original group that George created out of the barbershop.
The
The
doo-wop group.
Parliaments. And like the cigarette. And they were a doo-wop group. George went on to become a writer for Motown. And the Parliaments, though, because they already had the Temptations, they had the Four Tops, they just took George's songs. And the Parliaments never got to record until they broke out from Motown and recorded their first hit, which was I Want to Testify. Later, they got I Want to Testify What Your Love Has Done to Me.
Mm-hmm.
What happened was that the record company claimed it owned the name Parliaments. So Parliaments got tied up. George was tired of that. And this was the beginning of the hippie era. And there was Jimi Hendrix, and George decided to go experiment with that music, and which was more guitar based. So Parliament was doo-wop. Funkadelic became the same people with a few extras, and it became
Mm-hmm.
guitar based and very rockish sounding. And
Mm-hmm.
because even though rock came from black music, all of a sudden rock was white and there was R&B.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, there's this R&B band that's now playing rock. That also shook up the industry. So
Mm-hmm.
Funkadelic,
Absolutely.
then same people playing different types of music. And he won the name Parliament, not Parliaments. So to bring the two together would be Parliament Funkadelic. So
Okay.
half of the show would be the Parliament songs, and then there'd be a change of costume, and here comes Funkadelic.
All right. Well, Jones, look, let me thank you for that. We've reached the end of this show, but I don't want you to go anywhere. We've got so much that we still need to talk about. I want to take you into the overflow room so that we can continue this discussion. I want to thank you for being our guest today to celebrate the living genius of George Clinton, Parliament, and Funkadelic. And I would encourage my listeners to listen to some old Funkadelic, man, from the 70s and early 80s. Listen to some real music by some real musicians and expand your mind before it's too late.
Or
This is
free your
Tony
mind.
Browder with the Browder File
Whoa,
Show.
whoa.
And we always close the show with another group, another favorite group of mine that is in the same spirit of Parliament Funkadelic, and that's Earth, Wind, and Fire. And the messages of Parliament Funkadelic um, is the same as Earth, Wind, and Fire. It's the same message that I leave you all with every week. It's the message is all about love. So learn to love yourself, your higher self. Bring the best of yourself with you everywhere you go. And if you do that, then I look forward to seeing you next week. So this is Tony Browder. Thank you for this show, the Browder File Show, with our special guest, Diem Jones. And I will see you next week. Peace out. Welcome to the Overflow Room of the Browder File Show. We're continuing our discussion this evening with Diem Jones. Diem Jones is a consummate artist, photographer, poet, thought leader. You name it, Diem does it better than most folk. He's here to talk about Parliament Funkadelic. He's here to talk about music that has shaped our lives music that has been the soundtrack of our lives and shapes our future. So Diem, as we finished up the WPFW portion of the show, you were talking about, George Clinton having been a writer for Motown and then separating and going out on his own. I recall in a documentary I saw last year on George Clinton, there was a piece in there where he was talking about, or someone from Motown was talking about his time with Motown and how all of the Motown artists, the Temptations, Gladys Knight, Stevie Wonder, Supremes, they were all pretty buttoned down and very formal entertainers, right? And there was some event the Motown was sponsoring, a Christmas party or something. And they said George Clinton came in with his boys and he just cut up. He started dancing on the tables, taking his clothes off, and tore the roof off the sucker. You know,
Well,
George's personality was too big to be constrained by the limitations imposed on him by Berry Gordy and the Motown structure. So he shifted gears, and as you stated, uh, rock music, rock and roll music, and hippies were a big thing in the '70s. And George saw that. George obviously knew of the African origins of that rock music, and he decided to take it back, right? And Funkadelic was created specifically to do rock music as it was originally designed to be done, with a little bit of funk on it. So,
a lot.
yeah, yeah, take us, pick up from that story and take us wherever you want to go, man.
Well, the once again, when we talk about doo-wop, the parlance, that was you know, that's when you had your hair dyed, fried, and laid to the side. You wore your suits. You had choreographed steps.
Yes. And
Whereas,
everybody wore the same outfits, right?
yes, yes,
Yes.
and those, the original parliaments were singers.
Hmm.
And as I said, everybody, if you look at some of the old pictures in the early 60s, everybody, had the finger waves. Um, but Funkadelic on the other side was, gritty. This was holy jeans and multiple colors. Because, colors and black folks, if you go back to the continent, you see, oh, let's see, I got a little issue here. Whoops. Uh, okay. Um, Colors, when you go to the continent, become very important. For example, the Maasai in Kenya wear red. Go just across the border to Tanzania, they wear blue. And like the colors, like what we're wearing, come from the continent.
Hmm.
So
Shout out to
Funkadelic,
Damali as well, West
yeah,
Africa.
yes.
Yes, Mali. Hmm.
Um,
Mali from Mali. Okay.
so as the military brat that I was, um, you know, 1968, the year that Dr. King passed, I was living in Fargo, North Dakota. And I would come home in the summers, like, to, be with my mother. And summer of '68 was different. I got off the plane and I saw brothers wearing lime green socks and orange socks and polka dots and all of these colors. And I said to, friends in the neighborhood, it's like, well, what happened? Where'd all these colors come from? Because if I had wore these colors a year ago, you would have called me a Bama. And
Hmm.
no. He said, no, well, in the riots, these colorful clothes came out of the warehouses because they weren't selling, they were in the back. So I say that the King riots sparked the fashion revolution.
Hmm.
So the Funkadelic were part of that revolution, wearing every kind of color you could think of. In fact, the colors got exemplified with George because he put colors in his hair.
True.
But now George Clinton is colorblind,
Huh.
always has been. Now you say as colorful as he dresses, yeah, because he can't tell.
He has no idea what he's wearing and what matches.
Right. So he made it match, and
Hmm.
that became a style. And so the difference between the Funkadelics would be the guitar based, the horns, the female singers would be all part of predominantly the Parliament side of the musical presentations. Um, but it was interesting going back to concerts at that time to see both because when we developed the mothership would land on the stage, um, and George would come down as Dr. Funkenstein, and he was actually playing the role of a pimp with a cane and a swagger, and the limo was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. When it was time to change to Funkadelic, George would come out as a butterfly. It was a transformation, like a
Mm.
butterfly transforms from a caterpillar to a butterfly. Well, that was the indication in the show of the transformation from Parliament to Funkadelic.
Mm.
Um, so both groups, what George did in the mid '70s was to create different music for both Parliament and Funkadelic and get different record deals.
Yeah.
And they had their own identity, their own following, and then there became spinoffs. The spinoffs included Parlette. They were girl singers. The Brides
Mm-hmm.
of Dr. Funkenstein, another set of the girl singers, with Lynn Mabry and Don Silva. Um, the horn section, Fred Wesley and the Horny Horns. Bernie Worrell was a spinoff. Bootsy Collins was a spinoff. Zapp, Roger Troutman and Zapp was a spinoff.
Mm.
All of these came out of basically the same people, because remember, spontaneity breeds creativity. Let's funk it. So you could go in the studio and be recording for four different acts and not
Right.
know that when you walked in the rooms. But each of these spinoffs had their own theme, like the horns, Fred Wesley and the Horny Horns. Of course, mostly horn playing, mostly instrumental, some words. I'll never forget the Horny Horns album. Um, there was a song called Between Two Sheets. Everybody rise between two sheets. And you would think that that would be sexual activity. But guess what else are sheets? Sheets of paper, better known as money.
Jeez.
Everybody rise, come from underneath two sheets. Unleash yourself from this pursuit of money. Everybody rise from between two sheets. So, of course, the sexual innuendos are what most people heard, but the seed that was planted was the other one. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what's still here today. That's what's enlightening people. That's what's getting the music of George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic is some of the most sampled music in the music industry. Most of hip hop is based on P Funk.
Exactly.
And once again, the innuendos. I want the bomb. I want the P Funk. I want my funk uncut. Remember,
Cut.
is funk is fun with a K on it, and the K was for kindness. So when he was saying, I want my funk uncut, people thought there were drug innuendos there. Um, but, if that's where you went with it, okay. Was that the intention? Not particularly. If that's the way you want it, that's how George take, well, if that's how you want to take it, let me learn from you.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, funk then became the music. So I want my music uncut. Don't step on my funk. Don't
Mm-hmm.
cut it. Don't mix it. Don't water it down. I want the
Right.
bomb. I want
I
the
want the
pure
bomb.
funk.
Yeah.
I want the bomb. I want the P funk. I want my funk uncut. So, there were so many messages when George broke off and became a solo artist, and, did projects. Well, Atomic Dog came out of that era. And Atomic Dog resonates with me in particular because of its origins. So Bernie Worrell, as we talked about, was a keyboard player par excellence for many years and many of the hits. When Bernie left the group, there was a new keyboard player, uh, Asian cat. So I go to the studio for Electric Spanking the War Babies, and the Asian over in the corner, you know, sunglasses, trying to be cool. My name is Chong. Well, Chong and I started talking, and it turns out his name is David Lee Spradley, and he was my best friend in Germany in third, fourth, and fifth grade. And we didn't see each other from then until the studio with George. Um,
Small world, brother.
it is,
Small, small world.
and David is who wrote the music for Atomic Dog,
Mm-hmm.
and went on to do his thing and with Earl Clue after he left P Funk.
Okay. I
But
remember going back to this video I saw on George. There was a segment on the making of that song, and that George came into the studio, and he it was the last place that he wanted to be, and he just laid out some words and left, and then your guy, your friend Chong, and the engineer just took what George left them and came up with Atomic Dog, and it was one of George's biggest hits.
right, I mean, bow wow, bow wow
Yo,
wow, yo
yo,
UBA. But dog, when you spell it backwards, is God.
yeah.
And so the messages from that song, like many of them, um, George, and another solo album had Medicaid Frog Dog Alert, and he was talking about the medical industry. He had the title on that album was a track on that album was "I'm Gonna Make You Sick. I'm Gonna Make You Sick of Me." He was basically talking about um, back to like the bigger the headache, the bigger the pill. Doctors are here to make you sick. I'm going to
Mm,
make you sick of me. I'm going to make you want to run away from me, but I'm going to have you come back.
mm,
And he said some very disparaging things about the Medicaid system at that time, which
mhm.
um, you know have
Well,
great
which
resonance today.
need to be said today.
Yes,
I've got friends in the profession who refer to it as the sick care industry and not the health care industry.
right.
So we do need somebody to wake us up and speak truth to powerful organizations, institutions, and individuals. But listen, man, I want to go back to something you had mentioned earlier when you were talking about the various components within George's group. You had the female singers, you had the horn section, you had the rock guitar, you had the funky bass, you had the keyboardist, and one of the groups, and then you had the eclectic costumes and personalities on stage. And one of the images that springs to my mind as you were describing that phase of Parliament and Funkadelic was Sly Stone.
Mhm.
Sly Stone is from the Bay Area, and he was credited with helping to shift the tone and tenor of R&B music by bringing in the guitars, by bringing in the horns, by having um, females in the band, and by having everyone dress independently. So he kind of broke the mold, and George just took it to another level. And I see a stream of musical continuity that was passed uh, from certain musical groups to the other, kind of like a musical consciousness baton that was passed down. James Brown was doing the music in the '60s and introduced funk, and then Sly picked up the baton in the late '60s, early '70s, and took it to another level. And then George came in and took it to another level. So I can see some continuity within all of these musicians where they made music that got you up on the dance floor, shaking your groove thing, but it also had a message that motivated you to fight the power, right?
Hmm.
Motivated you to free your mind and do something to make your life in the world better. And for me, those were the best years of music because it was
Hmm.
pure. It was from musicians who played instruments. Everything wasn't digitized. Everything wasn't sampled, and it just brought a different energy. As someone who's spent a considerable portion of your life uh, in the music industry, what can you share with us about music's ability to influence, to shape, and transform consciousness? What are your personal thoughts on that?
Well, thanks for the question. I think at the core of music is rhythm, and rhythm comes generally from the drum. and the first drum on the planet was the heartbeat. So it doesn't surprise me at all that music based on rhythm would be so influential to people because it goes back to your heart. 6/9, for example, is the heartbeat rhythm, which is why reggae is so popular because it's 6/9.
And now, what is 6/9? Define that for me. Six.
Well, we talked about 4/4 time,
Mm-hmm.
so now there's six. So 6/9 is instead
So
of
it's a
four.
rhythm with 9 beats, and the accent is on the sixth note, or what? How do you?
Um, yes, yes, that's an easier way to say it. I mean,
Nine beats to the bar with the emphasis on the sixth beat.
correct,
Okay, okay.
correct.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so music resonates. That's when I was saying earlier how you can feel music sometimes before you hear music.
Mm-hmm.
And each tone that you hear can resonate with a different organ. If you look at the chakras, for example, there are tones with the chakras that
Mm-hmm.
that ignite them, that stimulate them, and
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, um, you find more fluidity throughout your consciousness and your thinking and your walking. That's why a song can inspire you to get up off of that thing.
If
And
you
it's not
dance,
always
you feel
about
better,
dance.
right?
Yeah. A lot of the messages would also get you up off of that thing. Like, raise the roof.
Mm-hmm.
We are told that we live in this box and we have to operate within the confines of the box. Do we really? Why can't we raise the roof? Why can't we go beyond the roof? Why are we
Mm-hmm.
when we should be flying?
Mm-hmm.
These are the kind of questions that get posed and sometimes subliminally posed within the construct of the song. And George is a master of that. And I'm honored to have worked with him for so many years, and glad that he's still creating and still listening, because you can't create if you don't listen.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was George who encouraged us to tear the roof off the sucker. You know,
Off the mother side.
off the mother sucker. I tear the roof off the sucker, right? And I couldn't help but think about that song when I watched Sinners in the scene where Sammy is in the juke joint, and they literally tear the roof off the sucker and burn the house down, right? And burn the house down. So it speaks to the transformative power of music.
Hmm.
Maybe that's one of the reasons why certain music has been suppressed or certain music has been modified in order to diminish that transformative aspect and produce sounds that will keep people comfortable at functioning from their lower chakras, right?
Hmm.
Being comfortable, being on the ground, being in the dirt, being dogs, and not being the opposite of a dog, as you just said, being gods, being the gods and goddesses that you really are.
And God is within. So
And the God
how
is
do, how
within,
do we how do we go within and ignite and
right?
inspire?
So it goes back to good thoughts, bad thoughts. Think right, and you can fly, for the kingdom of heaven is within.
Absolutely.
The kingdom of heaven
Amen.
is within. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love it. I love it. Look, man, let's switch gears for a minute. Um, you talked in the earlier segment about your meeting George through a photo assignment. So let me pull up this PowerPoint here, and let's look at some of your photography, and I want to have you um, walk us through some of these images and what they
Okay.
mean to you, the circumstances under which um, they were shot, and just illuminate us. So let me make sure I can do this. I want to bring this up, share. I think I have it. Allow this. Participants can now see my screen. And let's see here, bring you in. Okay, so we're looking at the
Uncle Sam
classic
with you.
Uncle Jam Wants You cover. So you already described, George came into the studio and um, wanted to be
She
shot
renewed.
in like Huey Newton in the peacock chair, right?
Right.
And so take us through that, and then the picture on the right is George signing that album cover.
Well, once again, this was originally desired to be Huey Newton, and Huey Newton took an infamous photo in a peacock chair.
Hmm.
But we we upgraded, we elevated the name to Uncle Jam. That's George in the fatigues, the P on the, it's really an MP emblem on his shoulder, on his forearm,
Okay,
but
military
that
boots.
just shows the P. That's the bop gun his hand is resting on. We brought that in the studio. This is my studio in Mount Rainier, by the way, which is just on the DC border, warehouse that I had converted. Went out and rented the chair. George brought in the flashlight. George and Archie. Archie is his manager. Um, the bop gun, which Sir Nose, Star Child used the bop gun to make Sir Nose devoid of funk dance. And the
Hmm.
flashlight was from another song, and shine a light on the funk,
Hmm.
shine your light, and so these were subliminal elements in a way from these two major iconic songs, with the new icon, Uncle Jam, in the middle.
Hmm.
Notice in his mouth that is canvas, I do believe,
Hmm.
um, and finger up. Everything is on the one. Those were, believe it or not, George could walk on stage with those boots and dance. But and that flag, One Nation Under a Groove, which was also a iconic song, and also a never-ending message for us. One nation under a groove. We can all come together as one under a groove,
Yeah.
defined behind a rhythm, behind the appropriate rhythm. So if we can find that rhythm, we'll be again on the one.
And I'm looking at the colors in the logo type Uncle Jam Wants You is red, black, and green, red, white, and blue, right?
Yes,
The joining of two nations, right? One
two
nation under
worlds.
the funk.
Yes.
Yep. One nation under a groove.
Hmm.
All right, so let's look at the next image we have here. Let me see. There we go. Yeah, so tell us about these three flicks, man, and what was going on when you shot them, and just walk us down memory lane.
Well, one of the things I had to do, because costuming was so, the group was constantly on the road, and costuming was very important. Often costumes would be delivered back, just before the show.
Mm.
So, as the primary photographer, I would have to create studios backstage. So, both the picture of George, that was in a shower stall backstage, um, because that was the only place to catch it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would do group shots. I would do the same thing with Bootsy. That's also backstage. Getting them to be able to come to the studio was a difficult thing to navigate. So, you know, um, have camera will travel, Diem to
Mm-hmm.
the rescue. Um, so both,
And you ultimately changed your format, right? You got a much smaller camera to shoot with.
yes. Now I'm using a 35 millimeter camera
There you
instead
go.
of an 8x10 view camera for the flexibility to be able to change lenses. Like if you notice the picture of Bootsy, that's a wide angle lens, which is why there's a little bit of distortion with the guitars.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and of course, doing live photos, that's Gary Scheider at the end. I had a way of shooting um, live pictures. I would combine the stage lights with the strobe. So you see the color, but it's not a blurry picture. That would be, um, you know, it is a sharp picture because of using the two different types of light. So I would be in the pit often. I've had hair singed by pyrotechnics. I've had my assistant in the pit next to me who had his camera stolen because somebody
Mm-hmm.
reached over the wall and just took it off his shoulder, and and the audience opened up. Excuse me, it was like a wave, and there went the camera. Wasn't my camera. but he was still part of me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so two backstage studios. Excuse me. Let me get a sip of water,
Yeah,
please.
no problem. Quench your thirst, brother. And I want to ask you a technical question as well. When you shot the live performance, were you shooting film or slides?
Well, okay. Technically speaking, slides are film.
Slides are film. All right, all right.
I
And
was
was it
using
Ektachrome or
trans
was it tungsten?
because I was using a strobe. It was daylight film.
Okay.
Um, but I always shot on transparencies. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you could shoot on transparency film or negative film.
Mm-hmm.
And since things were usually projected, and for printing purposes, you want to have the transparency. And so often, like with Bootsy, um, that shoot was part of traveling with him. Um, by the time the tour started, the stage had just arrived, and we needed a tour book. So for the first three or four shows, I had to ride around with Bootsy in his bus and shoot the band rehearsing, shoot the band playing with the new stage set, and 5 days later have actually a tour book. Um, and um, you know, being able to shoot on stage and create studios backstage made all that possible. And not sleeping much also.
Well, yeah, you give new meaning to art direction. Yeah, covering all the bases. Let's look at
Yeah,
what we have next. Your guy Bernie. So
Bernie Worrell.
this was the first album cover, first solo album of Bernie.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And Wu was the name um, that he grabbed. We share the name, but differently. Wu is the world of opportunity, and all the Wu in the world. Um, Bernie. So the concept was, what is Wu? Well, there's the spiritual Wu, the financial Wu, the triple X-rated Wu, sex, and the obscene Wu. And I had to then create these illustrations or these photos to define this. So Bernie, we went out to the desert outside of LA, and we of course airbrushed in the keyboard later, but we're really out there. Um, that's those are real palm trees. That's a real desert, and that's real sweat. Um, the spiritual woo was the others were all shot in my studio, which at the time was on Madison Street, 1423 Madison, in DC. Um, you know, a tabletop setup of the some of the symbologies that represent us and our travels. The financial woo was a model, you know, this ridiculous chasing of dollars. And what else do we chase? That's the dollars are covering it up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the triple X rated we were talking about, Two's Company and Three's an Orgy. Um, that the title was put on the board, but that was always the concept to shoot it and then add that later. Not
Mm-hmm.
to be um, vulgar or disgusting because we covered up anything that couldn't pass the mustard.
Mm-hmm.
And the obscene woo was cake and ice cream melting.
Yeah.
You know, and how could you do that? And that became the cover. The photo on the right is Bernie later at a recording session with Don Silva in the North Bay several years later. But that is my brother Bernie Worrell,
Yeah.
master of woo.
You know,
Uh,
looking at this cover now, it's been years, it's been decades since I've seen this cover, and I'm noticing one of the elements in the spiritual woo is a statue of Asar or Osiris. So you got
yes,
a little comedic spirituality in there too.
yes, sir.
Right
Yes.
on,
Yeah,
right
well,
on for the right on.
we
Yeah,
come from the same cloth.
absolutely,
And
absolutely.
that's, I remember I mentioned earlier, Bernie would have racks of keyboards to
Mm-hmm.
play them all at once. Well, that's a piece of the rack. And he would just stand up and reach over and you know, the sounds that Brother Bernie could create were just very moving, very stimulating, and very um, mm, I call him like he would have interrupting notes. He would play notes that would come interrupt whatever your heart, however your heart was beating would be interrupted because of Bernie. um, but yeah,
Yeah, Bernie's no longer with us, right?
no, he isn't. No, he
Okay.
isn't. Sad to say, a lot of them, the group's been around so long. A lot of the original band members that have passed through. I mean, there's a just a long list of members of the group who are no longer with us, from Gary Scheider, Bernie Worrell, Tiki Fullwood, Eddie Hazel, um, Fuzzy Haskins.
Mm,
I don't want to. The list is longer than I can even
sure, sure, sure.
know, but all of the members of this organization were part of a family, and
Yeah,
they
yeah.
all collaborated in a way that I hope the spirit of collaboration lives on because
You, George had a way of attracting um, some unusual participants in his band. I remember Jessica Cleaves left Earth, Wind, and Fire, left Friends of
and
Distinction, Earth, Wind, and
and
Fire, and she did an album with Parliament Funkadelic, and then Felipe Wynn, former lead singer of the Spinners. Um,
right,
yeah, he.
and I did both of their covers.
Okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Really, really great talent. And that speaks to, to have these talented musicians and singers connect with George speaks to his magnetism, his creativity, because folk want to be where the power is, where the funk is, where the entertainment, where the joy is. And that's really says a lot about what George has created and sustained over these decades.
And by bringing together these minds, it wasn't to come follow a written plan. It was to come
Mm-hmm.
be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That was the other freedom. Yes, he had that magnet draw, but when you got there, it was to be creative, not to be restricted. And a lot of
Yes.
creative projects are uh, kind of pedantic in how they begin. And
Mm-hmm.
George was definitely not holding anybody back.
Right.
Never did that.
Right.
Never did that.
Okay. A couple more slides here.
So on the left, we have this is both of these are backstage studios. You can see actually the light stand in both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Backstage meaning um, shower stalls. Backstage, I would take my roll of paper, my lights. On the left of the Brides of Funkenstein and Parlette. Sheila Horn, better known as Amuka. Um, Don Silva, Lynn Mabry. Um, oh boy, and other members of those two different groups. This is one of the rare times when everybody was together, but they were distinctive. The Brides would have their music, Brides of Dr. Funkenstein, as did Parlette.
Mm-hmm.
On the right, you have characters, have Boogie Masan, Cynthia, I believe, is the female. This is from the Motor Booty Affair tour, and he was, looking at a motor booty. Uh,
Where did you come up with these ideas, these concepts, man? It's
well,
otherworldly.
we didn't
That's
talk about it much, but that was, in the Parliament world, there were stories told. There were themes that were developed and played out
mm-hmm.
on stage,
Mm-hmm.
from the mothership connection to um, the Motor Booty Affair was about an underwater disco where you can dance and not get wet. So
Mm-hmm.
the player was Mr. Wiggles the Worm, which was a character George played. And these are his ladies, Giggles and Squirm, which were the two ladies on the left wearing the white foxtails. They were
Okay.
Giggles and Squirm. So they had different outfits for that, and they were Giggles and Squirm. I think there might be a photo in what you have there of them. Um, The motor booty is being touched, but then there was rump of steel skin. Playing on the words of Rumpelstiltskin, rump of steel skin. So no matter how, you can rub steel skin, and you won't hurt it. Only if you're gentle. So those are the tales of those two photos.
Okay. I think I may have. I think this is the last one.
So there are the girls again with George and another. From that was never the brides of a record called "Never Buy Texas from a Cowboy,"
Mm-hmm.
and George would come up with these characters, and there were clothing designers. The Legaspi brothers were large. There was a sister in D.C. called Space Lady who did costumes as well. Um, um, and that is the character in the middle of Rump of Steel Skin. And moving forward on the right, we had an album out called R&B Skeletons in the Closet. And if you look closely, those are all plastic skeletons around George's neck. Um, um, and that's what we all wore at the same time. I mean, I went to business meetings with skeletons around my neck. I lost a major client from Australia, actually, who came up to LA to meet me because I was designing and printing all of their brochures. So I go to the meeting night after the Letterman show, wearing my skeletons, my pith helmet.
And he
Needless
thought
to
you had
say,
lost your mind, right?
well, I lost the contract the next day.
Mm-hmm.
But um, there's something to be said about R&B, rhythm and blues, skeletons in the closet, can't be held back. And here they are to attack. So this is George in that era playing out that character in my studio in Culver City, California. Yeah, which was better known as the Bakery.
Okay, the bakery. And
Yeah,
actually, we have one last slide here, I believe.
but I was asked to do things. When I was talking earlier about interpretations. So with the
Mm-hmm.
Motor Booty affair, there was a desire to shoot the group. It's an underwater disco. So how do we get all the group underwater? So I said, we can, airbrush that in. No, everybody's got to get wet. So thus the concept got a little bit invaded the creative. I said, if you want to get wet, and let me see, where are you going to be? Oh, you're in Florida. Why don't you all take the bus and meet me in Weeki Wachee, Florida, where they shot the creature from the Black Lagoon? And we'll do some underwater photography there. I'd never done underwater photography, but I got the gear, took my assistant. I'm waiting for the bus. The bus pulls up. Um, in Weeki Wachee, there's a mermaid show that goes on. There's a big bubble that's underwater where the mermaids go and breathe,
Mm-hmm.
but that's about 15 feet down. But you can see it from the audience because it's like you're in a big fish tank. The bus came with the whole group. The ladies got out of the bus and looked at the water and they said, "Oh no." So what happened was what I thought originally. A couple of guys went down, swam down to the bubble. So I swam down and shot the bubble. And later, I think a week later, they were in DC and came to my studio and did a group shot and superimposed that with the bubble. And it looked like they were underwater.
Mm-hmm.
The photo you're looking at, one of George's pastimes is fishing. He is an avid fisherman. That is his meditation.
Yes, sir.
And I mean, I can tell you times that we went out into Santa Monica Bay in a dinghy, three adult black men in Santa Monica Bay in a 14-foot dinghy, but we caught some fish.
I hear you.
Um, and George goes out on, with big fishing boats. So there he is fishing. It's in a river. We talked about his colored hair in that era. He was, in full bloom. And singing, of course, that was in my studio on the right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Let me stop my share. And so, what's next for George? What's next for you and George in your ever evolving relationship?
Well, George just got inducted into into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Um, in January, there is a street naming ceremony in Detroit where they're renaming a street P-Funk Avenue. At that event, there'll be, there's street namings are always very, very important. And Detroit, being the music capital that it is, has streets named after, there's Barry Gordy, there's a Amp Fiddler, was another keyboard player with P-Funk, um, Smokey Robinson. I think there's a Smokey Avenue or something of that nature.
Hmm.
Um, there's a feature-length film that's in process, a biopic on George, um, and that's been in development for a few years, and now it's actually moving forward. I'm not at liberty to speak too much about it,
Sure.
but stay tuned because George has been around and touched so many people. Um, the documentation. I mean, there have been books on George and P Funk. I did one of the first books, which was called Number One Bimini Road. Um, but there are more records, more songs being produced. The tour right now at 84, George is recently in Japan, recently toured. He was in DC not too long ago, actually, a few weeks ago. Even though last year was the retirement tour. There's already talk about next year there's going to be a full replica of the mothership on that tour.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes, yeah. So stay tuned. Funk gets stronger as it goes longer,
No question about it.
and it is.
And for those who have been to DC to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, on the fourth floor in the Culture Hall, you'll see what I believe was the original mothership proudly on display there. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
that
So
is the
so
case, and
so, so much history, man.
the guidebook for the museum has a picture, one of my pictures of George on the cover. There's also um, the African American Museum of Music in Nashville. Is an exhibit. Um, so when you've been around so long, people start presenting you in different venues.
Sure.
Being the producer of many of the images, I happen to be in several museums. My work happens to be in several museums, which I'm honored, and just grateful that I was able to capture some of this history and create imagery that helped actually move it all forward.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's quite an honor.
Well, listen, you shared some of your thoughts on what's next for George Clinton and his musical entourage. As we wrap up, what's next for Diem Jones?
Well, well, right now, I have published 6 books. My last book was called God, the Journey Within, which is an anthology. One of the contributors was actually Archie Ivy. George did a review that's on the back cover of the book. My next book will be called A Sufi Warrior. That's in production right now. I've produced 3 solo CDs. George is on all 3 of them. Um, uh, um, uh, my wife and I have created a nonprofit that works across the oceans to bring needed medical services to. Um, it's an exchange actually between. Now we're in East Africa, Kenya, but we've gone to the Gambia, taking doctors over, um, bringing doctors back with knowledge. Yes, you go to take the knowledge and skills you have, but what can you learn? Because every basically every ailment that we treat here with pharmaceuticals has an herbal base,
Yeah.
and that's still part of what we see in the continent. So very involved in our nonprofit work. It's the Institute for Community Evolution. We commute between the Jersey Shore and Billings, Montana. We've got
Billings, Montana. All right now.
but we have workshops that we do, and fortunately, have the strength, have the wherewithal, and the blessings to continue to attempt to inspire people. Once again, to inspire them to think, because it ain't illegal yet.
There you go. Yet. So listen, if for the souls who were inspired listening to you, if any of them would like to reach out to you to partake of any of your products or to engage any of the services that you and your wife provide, can you leave us with email address or telephone number or website where people can go to get additional information about you and
Sure.
the many hats you wear?
Well, thank you. I'm best captured at therealdiemjones.com.
Mm-hmm.
I did have once upon a time I had diemjones.com, but that got it got kidnapped and became a porno site. So thus the real diemjones.com.
Like the whitehouse.com is a porno site.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the easiest way to connect me. You can see products there, CDs there, books there, um, and contacts. And yeah, that's a good place to find me.
Okay, well, excellent, man.
If I am your next door neighbor, so I might be knocking on your door.
All right, well, welcome to the neighborhood. That's all I
Well,
can say.
thank you, my brother.
Yeah, welcome to the neighborhood. Well, look, man, thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely busy day to talk with me, to talk with our audience. The entire interview will be posted on my YouTube channel, and I'm sure you'll be getting some inquiries from around the globe, man. It's been a pleasure having you on. You've lived an interesting life. I'm honored to have shared um, this planet with you, and I look forward to what we can create in the lifetimes to come.
Well, thank you, my brother, as do I. Just for the viewing audience, Brother Browder and I go back to the 70s when we had a graphic relationship, meaning,
Wait, you mean a arts
oh,
and
wait,
graphic relationship? Yeah,
clean it up, my
clarify that,
brother.
brother. I don't want rumors. See, that's how rumors get started. Some
Clean
folks
it
may
up for
take you literally.
me. Mr. Browder is an exemplary graphic artist illustrator. And we had a company in the 70s called DM Anthony Marketing Associates. And we did things like the promotional campaign for Boris, the world's first talking chess computer. And we did a lot of projects together back in the late 70s. And then George invited me to come to LA to become the creative director for Uncle Jam Records. That was 79. I came back to DC in 82 or 83, and Tony Browder had a TV show. Tony Browder was doing tours. I said, wait, 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 wait. Where's the kid? And lo and behold, my brother had unleashed a major part of himself, which was all about service, all about taking people where they had been restricted from going before and showing them a path to their real roots. And I'm so honored to know you, Tony, and thank you for all the touches you have given to the world, and may they continue as does the day.
Yeah, well, I thank you for that. I appreciate it, and I can truly say that we are kindred spirits, and
Mm.
it's an honor to work with creative souls who know that there are no limitations. The only limitations we have are those that we impose on ourselves. So, as George has said, and as we have both demonstrated in our lives, free your mind, and the rest of you will follow.
Absolutely. And, don't forget to tell your story.
Yeah,
Because
yeah, yeah.
everybody has a story, everybody has a song. Let us rejoice with our songs so we
Mm-hmm.
can build this nation, the nation that's coming, not the nation that we're in.
Absolutely.
Because that's where we get to stretch our wings instead of wear out our shoes.
Yeah, yeah. And I can close on this note. I have had an opportunity to see multiple dimensions of George through you and your interactions with him. I recently saw an interview he had done at the Smithsonian, and it was something of a celebration of music and history. And George says something very profound that really caused me to admire his thinking process even more. There was a question posed to the panelists about what freedom means to you, and different. There were several scholars there who pontificated as to what freedom meant to black folk and all of this. And George just cut straight to the chase. He said, "Freedom is being free from the need to be free."
There you go.
That's a George Clinton response, and it just cuts through all the BS and just lays it out there. So we are striving to be free from the need to be free, to be our best selves, and allow the universe to work through us to transform this place that we call planet Earth.
And funk it move and remove. Can you dig it?
Consider it done, brother.
All
Consider
right.
it done.
Well, thank
All
you.
right, man.
A
Well,
joy,
thank you so much,
an
and
honor.
continued success with you and all the work that you're involved in. The projects with your wife is like taking you to another level, taking you to other lands, and it's all being done for the right purposes, and that's what we need more of. People with good intentions doing good work for the world. So, thank you, brother. I love you, and I
Love you, brother.
appreciate you.
All right. Thank you so much. And keep on keeping on. And your birthday is
Absolutely.
soon too.
Pardon me.
Your birthday is soon too.
Yeah, well, I was pleased to find out that George and I are both Leos, and that's a very that's a very comforting thing.
Yeah, you're 4 days apart.
Yep, yep, yep.
All
Great
right.
minds, son. As they
Yeah,
say,
indeed.
great minds. All
It
right,
was
man. Well, thank
a,
you much.
a pleasure and an honor, brother. Thank you.